Hello, and welcome to the Three Questions podcast, where we dive deep into the world of wealth management and help you connect with industry experts. I'm your host, Wayne Baxter, Senior Executive Manager at One Capital Management. Are you or someone close to you consider moving into a residential retirement community? If so, you're not going to want to miss today's episode. We're going to address the three questions you should ask about residential retirement communities. Thank you for taking time to check us out. And if you enjoy this episode of the Three Questions podcast, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube and podcast channels. On this episode of the Three Questions podcast, we're exploring a topic that many of us will likely need to consider, whether it's for ourselves or for a loved one, and that is, when is the right time to move into a residential retirement community? And knowing the right questions to ask can make really all the difference. And to discuss this and many more is my very good friend and special guest, Woodland Hills, California-based Susan Pomerantz. She is the owner and CEO of Concepts for Living. They are a senior housing specialist, and what they are dedicated to do is finding a community that will bring seniors the quality of life and the care they all deserve. Sue, great to see you. Thank you so much for making time for us. This is long overdue, and I've really been looking forward to having you as a guest today.
Well, you know, the best things are worth waiting for. So thank you so much, Wayne, for having me.
This is great. Susan did a presentation a few months back with an organization that we're both affiliated called Provisors, and very compelling. And I think I got a hold of her right afterwards and said, I need to have you on my podcast. And then we had our big renovation here, and we had to put this whole idea on hold, but I'm really glad you're here today. And I think, before we get to the three questions, I think a really good idea, for clarity purposes, is to be clear on what we mean when we refer to a residential retirement community. So maybe just to get us out the gate here, maybe you could just outline what a residential retirement community is.
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, there's a huge umbrella, and it's really, the acronym is RCFE, which means Residential Communities for the Elderly.
Okay.
These are not nursing homes. These are not institutional. These are a really resort retirement environment, and we call them cruise ships on land. They are a day-to-day party. But the nice part is the person makes their own schedule, and it's their home. They can go do as much as they want or as little as they want. They want to hang out in their room and read? Great. Hang out in your room and read, take a nap. But remember that there's a whole world outside that door. There is so much to choose from, and it's all about quality of life.
So what makes your company, Concept for Living, different in the field of placement services? And also, another thing I wanted to ask, and I'm also just put it out there right now, is the geographic territory where you can provide services. So just first of all, let's just get to, what makes your company so unique?
Most definitely, it's our healthcare background. I should explain that in our industry, there is no licensing. So anyone can do it. And that's fine. If you have the acumen and the desire to help people in that age group, wonderful, go for it. But having the healthcare background does make a difference. I have a wonderful team. My partner actually was a care manager and a personal caregiver too, which makes a big difference because you can relate. And then I have a clinician, a director of clinical services on staff. And my background was as a hospice admissions director. So we come from a lot. And we can listen to the families and talk to the doctors. And we can, I think, put things in a much more understandable way to our clients and ease the angst. And then, of course, what sets us apart is that we've been doing it longer than anyone else in the industry, because when I came out of hospice, I was okay, I needed to leave hospice for a few personal reasons, one of which my husband said he missed my smile. And I said, what does that even mean? And he said,
a smile.
and you don't think about it. And he said, you can't leave it at the office. You are always in grief. And I had to stop and think about that because hospice is heart-wrenching. And I did get very personally involved with our patients. And
It's
uh,
pretty unusual. I can identify with that comment because I get very connected with my clients as well, and they become more than just clients.
absolutely. And I'm very connected to our clients now, but not all of them are dying. And in the case of
That's a
hospice, it
good
was
thing.
always terminal. And so that was one of the reasons. And I was having some personal losses as well. So I left hospice, but I was like, okay, what now? And then I thought about what did I learn in all these years that I was the director of admissions. And I thought, okay, there's a huge gap out there. Now you have to remember, Wayne, this was 1999. So there wasn't assisted living that you drive up and down the block and see all of them. I thought there's got to be something besides keeping that person at home and it becoming more untenable, or putting them in a nursing home, which you never want to do for the last days of their lives.
Right.
And I thought, there's got to be something. So I just dove into the due diligence and I found the industry, but it was the size of a pinhead. And if you recall e-ticket rides at Disneyland back in the day, the growth of this industry has been an e-ticket ride, that I have been able to be witness to that pinhead into the explosion of assisted living and
Well,
senior
it was
retirement living.
predicted. We were told, and I've been in financial services now. I almost hate to admit it, but for 30 years,
Right.
and we were told this was coming. Like,
Yeah.
as much as you talk about it, this was not like
No. Nope.
anybody who was surprised about it. They were not paying attention because we were told very
Exactly.
clearly that we have an aging baby boomer demographic, of which
The baby
obviously,
boomers. Mhm.
I actually, when I was in Toronto, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I had a radio show on AM 740 in Toronto, and the name of the radio show was named by a very famous Canadian uh, TV person named Moses Znaimer, and he basically coined the frame Zoomers. Believe it or not, this is long before Zoom videos, but
Whoa.
he called baby boomers Zoomers. Basically formatted the radio station when he bought it
Very clever.
under that concept of Zoomers, right?
Very.
Sort of a positive spin on baby boomers, right?
And I also think that that was the advent, and you can correct me, you'll know more about this, the advent of long-term care insurance,
Big time.
right? I
And well,
mean,
what's happening now in Canada? Get this one. Um, is that there is so much long-term care insurance that was sold back then that now the Canadian insurance industry want nothing to do with it. You basically can't buy long-term care insurance in Canada anymore because
I
guess
think,
what? You want to guess why? People are making claims, right?
gee, duh, they're living long enough to have
And
to use it.
the way they were set up back then is that they would be reevaluated every 5 years and the premiums would go up. So now you really, I've had clients that have moved that are Americans that are moving to Canada that I've got them long-term care insurance on a U.S. based policy that covers them in Canada because they
I
can
was
get,
going to ask that,
yeah, for
actually.
sure, for
It
sure.
covers in Canada. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I'm so grateful.
you have to be a U.S. resident or citizen. You have to be. I have a client in Vancouver, for example. I know he's listening in, so he'll know I'm talking about him. Who is a U.S. citizen, and he has U.S. real estate, and we manage his U.S. assets, and he qualified, even though he's now living in Vancouver, as an example.
Nice. I
But
am so grateful when I have it here that my clients have it. I'm grateful for my own, but I'm so grateful when they have it because I know we'll talk about that at some point in time along the way here,
mhm.
but it certainly makes a difference.
Okay, geographic footprint, like you're in the San Fernando Valley and beautiful Woodland Hills. What's the geographic reach that your services provide, Susan?
Locally, we provide all of LA and Ventura counties. Okay. However, expanding beyond that, we partner with some great agencies throughout California that I have handpicked over the years. So we cover from the end of San Diego to the Mexican border, um, north to the Bay, Sacramento, Bakersfield, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara. I know I'm leaving some out, and and east as far as just beyond LA County into Pasadena and that area out
Hmm.
there. But
Hmm.
basically, oh, Bakersfield,
I was going to
Sacramento,
mention Bakersfield. I need to
and
get back to
and
there.
I that's pretty much it. But we pretty much, we can cover. a great deal of California, and they've been vetted by us and dedicated.
So if I have, I think I've told you this in the past, this podcast reaches all across the country and even into Canada. I have a lot of clients in Canada that listen to this as well, and folks and colleagues of mine that are located across the country. So if someone who listens to or watches our episode today is outside of what your reach is and outside, like if somebody is listening and say, I'm just making this up now, in Florida or upstate New York or the Midwest, and they contact us, either me or you, are you able to provide them with any kind of connection?
To a point, and I'm going to be very honest about this. I don't have the agency outreach that I do in California. I do, however, have some national contracts and with large corporations. And with those, we pretty much know how they operate and what they're going to be. They're pretty consistent everywhere they are. So
Okay,
if that potential client has the need for that kind of place and it's going to be appropriate for their senior or for themselves, that's great.
okay, perfect.
Typically, what I would do is this. I would tell them not to use a large internet company. I'm not going to name names because they're really not living. Those people they're talking to on the phone are representatives, but they're not living locally to where they live, the client.
Got
And
it.
so they don't know the neighborhood. I
Hmm.
suggest to them that they go on the internet and Google senior residential placement services in wherever the
Fill in the
city they
blanks
are.
using a zip code or a name of a city or whatever.
Right, exactly. Because if they're talking to someone who is really set up in that area, then they know the area. And it's not just a
Right.
big database they're pulling from. Because they could be talking to someone in Georgia, but live in, San Francisco. Well, that would be us, but live in, let's say, Phoenix or
Right.
anywhere,
Right.
Chicago.
Right. Right. That makes perfect sense. So I just wanted to get that out there because, you
I
know,
avoid the big ones, not because I have any ill feelings towards them. They're doing their job, but because they don't know the local environment. And I think that
understood.
makes a huge difference.
I'm pretty certain that our audience is eager to know what questions they should be asking. As we address the three questions you should ask about residential retirement communities. No doubt about it. So we're going to get right to it. I'm going to put you
Okay.
on the spot right away here.
Okay.
Question number one.
Yeah.
What are the levels of care that are available in residential retirement communities? You mentioned that, earlier on that you about what they aren't, they are not
Right. They're
hospice.
not nurse. That's right.
So what
Uh,
kind of what kind of levels of care are available?
in the large communities, let me address separately large communities and small homes because they both
Okay,
come under the large umbrella of residential care
right.
facilities and they're licensed to the same. So these are not nursing homes. That's a completely different licensing.
Hmm.
This is assisted living.
Understood.
Nursing home is nursing home. It's everything technical and medical and these are to help you have better quality of life, but they are not medical. There may be a nurse on staff, and many of them do have a nurse on staff, which is great. That's great for the emergencies, and they do have trained personnel, but they can't administer anything above and beyond blood pressure. Some can do diabetes injections, not too many. They can do anything that doesn't require 911, but they will look to 911 if they can't. That's why they're not a nursing facility and they're not licensed for that. They are assisted living. The large places are fabulous. They are the overall quality of life, what you're looking for. They are the reason to get up in the morning, get dressed, and go out and play. Um, they have activities from dawn till dusk and even beyond dusk because they show movies. And they have so many options for people to get involved. But I think I mentioned this before, they're not forced to get involved. This is
Right.
living your daily life. So many of our clients, I know we're going to address this, but so many of our clients have become isolated at home. And my very favorite client is the senior who can call me themselves and say, I'm lonely. I need more. I used to be social. I don't have my friends. They've gone for one reason or another. I want more out of life while I've got life left.
That's
The
a big
big play,
challenge, though. You love one of the hardest four-letter words anybody is to say is HELP, help, right?
yes, yes, and I love them for
Unfortunately.
that. And when I can work with the senior directly, and I can relate to the senior. I mean, I'm a senior. And so we're talking, as friends. And I can feel what they feel and understand what they're saying.
Hmm.
And when I can provide that quality of life that makes them happy, that's the best feeling in the world. And so that's what a large community does. It offers all that environment. And I guess we're going to cover it later, but exercise, art, movies, discussion groups,
Sure.
Tai Chi, it just goes on and on and on. Um, and then, should the person need help at that next level, it's built into the system. And I
That's
always encourage them, go while you're independent, go while all the fun is there. And then when you need help, you know the staff. They're not strangers coming into your apartment.
right.
There's a
Uh,
comfort level there.
you know, before we get on to question number two, I have a subset question. I always get criticized for the extra questions, but I have another question
Is that
to
right?
follow up to this one.
Toss it my way. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
If you
Is
catch me off
we
guard, I'll tell
talk,
you later.
the term senior is a very broad term. I mean, demographically speaking here. So again, I know there are outliers on we all know in the world, we live in a world of extremes, right? So let's talk about in the median here. What age group are typically you're finding that fall into the category of the clients you're serving? What age demographic? Because, when I
Because
first listened to you share about, well, it's like a party and a good time and the first thing I thought about was my better half. My better half's name was Susan, by the way.
of
And
course.
and I thought, well, Susan's going to say, let's move in there tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like, so what age group typically are the ones that are looking?
Can I ask you how old? She's gonna kill you for this one. Can
Yes,
I ask you how old she?
let's
That's
just
okay.
say,
No.
well, we're
All
of the
right.
same vintage. We'll
Okay.
just say early 60s.
Okay. I was gonna say much younger than I am. Okay. So I will be perfectly frank here. I am 79. I just had a birthday. I am 79. I would go into one of these communities in a heartbeat, not to have to cook anymore because I am married, not to have to cook anymore, take care of the house, to have all my day-to-day responsibilities that pile up, and just be able to have my life, my grandchildren, my kids, and not think about all the must-dos or the how am I going to get it done today is my idea of
But that's a
nirvana.
bit of your fuel, though, Sue. Let's be honest here.
What?
That's a bit of what drives the machine here, to be honest with you. There's a double-edged sword to that.
No, 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 no. I mean, when I take people out to see places, the relief on their face when they
I
walk
get
into
that.
these
I was
places
referring to
is,
you, though, but I get it. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
it's all right. But honestly, the median age,
Yeah,
the concrete median age is early 80s.
interesting.
People are living longer and they're
Yeah,
doing
we both
well.
know that's true.
Right, right. And so the median age is early 80s. There are
Hmm,
some that are in their late 60s. Those are usually the people not doing as physically well,
got
could
it.
still be cognitively doing well, but needing help. We
Got it.
also know that in-home care is astronomically expensive,
Yes,
even as much as our industry has increased, that one just has
through the
blown
chart,
up.
through the roof. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, and I would say early 80s is the median. And then
interesting.
I've got some great clients now, amazing clients in their 90s
You know what?
and well
Interesting.
into their 90s.
I don't know if I've shared this before. Interesting to your point. 20 years ago, I can't believe this is 20 years ago. 20 years ago, before I moved to the United States, I went to a Rolling Stones concert in San Francisco. And I brought two of my friends, Rick and Rick, from Toronto with me. Not brothers, by the way. Uh,
That's good.
and we went down and saw the Rolling Stones play in San Francisco. And there was two shows. So we were in between shows. First act went off and we were in between shows. And we were at the baseball stadium in San Francisco.
My
And
favorite. Was it
in,
Candlestick or Oracle?
no, the new one.
Oracle. Okay.
Yeah. And so standing there between acts, we're standing on the field, we're at second base, basically waiting. And I struck up a conversation with a surgeon from Phoenix. We were literally just, killing time waiting for the Stones to start. And so I asked this surgeon, I said, what has been the biggest change that you've seen? He'd been a surgeon, I guess, for 20 some odd years at the time. So this is like 2004, 2005. And I said, I asked him, what's the biggest change you've seen in the last 20 years being a surgeon? And, I expected to get a technical answer, like,
Scientific improvements.
right. He said the biggest change that he had seen in the last 20 years is the number of elected surgeries he did on octogenarians. This was back in 2005. So I
Okay.
can't see, I can't see that changing, and
No.
reversing. It's not, that hasn't gone the other way. I can
And I
pretty,
would think elective surgeries includes joint replacements.
of course.
Yeah, because they're not mandatory to living or dying, but they sure make a difference in your quality of life. So,
I'm,
yeah,
I'm telling you, seriously, hip replacements has been one of the biggest lifesavers.
I did it one. I have one.
Yeah.
I have one of my own and
I,
one.
I have a client who's done one, and I think if he hasn't done the second one, he's about to. But I would tell you, think about, I had more storytelling. A client of mine, this is back in Canada again, who I'll never forget this. With the radio show, she heard me on the radio, and she called in, and she's called my associate at the office. I need to talk to that man. I'll never forget it. And so she comes into my office, 85 years old, a little myopic, nevertheless 85. She come bounding into my office, and she was just a ball of activity. And she says, I'm in the process of negotiating with my surgeon. You're negotiating with your surgeon? She says, yes, I've just had both of my hips replaced, and I'm trying to persuade him to let me take my kids skiing at Whistler next year. 85. I swear to God, Sue, for real.
Okay.
What a
Okay. Gotta
character.
tell you,
What a character. Mrs.
I
Miller
have
was
one like that too. She's 91. This woman is so magnificent. I'm totally in love with her. I mean, I'm like just completely over the moon. And she is everything and so active. And I said to her, is it genetic? She said, no. She said, my mom died when she was 50 and my dad died when he was 60. And she
wow.
said, she has no diagnoses. But she said to me, but I'm slowing down. Now
But
she
I'm slowing
volunteers.
down.
Wait. She
91.
she volunteers at one of our hospitals, West Hills. She volunteers twice a week, 5 hours each. She
God bless
drives the
them.
freeways, but has given up driving at night. She takes classes at one of the junior college, Pierce, our junior college,
Right.
and she's just incredible. So I said to her, "How do you define slowing down?" And she said, "Well," she said, when I turned 90, I gave up tap dancing because my knees were starting to hurt. I
Good
It blew
Lord.
my mind. And that's why, I mean, that's why she's my new idol. I just
I can I can see that. What an example. Okay, let's get on to the
yeah,
second question
yeah, I
here.
know.
No, no,
We
no,
could,
this is great.
Wayne,
This is
we could do this
exactly
all day.
this is why I was really looking forward to having you as a guest. I knew this was going to be really good. Okay, question number two. Again, the question we're asking, the three questions you ask about residential retirement communities. So question number two, and again, Sue Pomerantz is my guest today from Concepts for Living. She's the CEO. She is the lead person and
The founder.
expert and founder. And so question number two, Sue, is what can I expect in regards to activities and social life? I know you touched on it, but let's
I did.
maybe dig
Yeah,
a little bit into that a little bit more. Like,
absolutely. First, I think it's really important to know about exercise. It's mandatory actually that they have to
interesting.
have some sort of daily exercise, and they do. And it can be anything from, I was in a community a few weeks ago with her actually, and they were doing boxing, and they had the bags, and they were socking them around, and and
So they have
they
actual gyms where they go in and they can
they
use the
use
workout
most of them have actual gyms, and some of them even have physical therapists on staff.
and massage
And
therapists.
not massage therapists, but
The
physical
physical
therapists.
therapist. Okay.
Mhm. They're usually contracted with an outside company, but they're there. And if the doctor prescribes physical therapy, it's built in. They don't have to go anywhere, which is really nice because they have all the machines. And but they'll also have chair exercises if people are less mobile and can't. Here's what I want to say to people that are watching and listening. When you go into a community like this, unless it's a designated independent only, which means non-licensed for assisted living, you are going to see people who are in walkers, on walkers, and in wheelchairs. That's life. I know that it makes the person coming in to visit shudder if they're not on a walker or in a wheelchair, but it is part of life. It's part of going out in the world. You see it all the time. You go into a restaurant, people come in. Don't judge the book by its cover. These are people who are still very active mentally and as physically as they're capable of being. And it's the mental activity that is most important.
I agree.
So take into consideration that because I know that when I first had my hip surgery for the first couple of weeks, it was mandated that I use a walker. So it gave me a different mental attitude too. And then it was a cane, and I'm very impatient for myself. But respect the fact that if they're looking at the same community that you're looking at, and unless they're going into memory care, which then their family is visiting, but if you're looking at that senior or you're looking at the dining room in the community and you see that, don't let that be a deterrent because they're there because mentally they can handle it.
Hmm.
And so then there's all going back to the question, they have discussion groups, they have speaker series, then they have all kinds of art, ceramics, painting, jewelry, everything you can imagine in art. Of course, they have bingo because it's traditional and you have to have bingo. It's not mandated, but everybody does.
Hmm.
And and um, and
What
then there
about
are
field
movies.
trips, Sue? What about field trips, going out to
Getting there.
shows, concerts?
Getting there. So I was going to say there are movies. They have movies at least once a day, and some of them have beautiful theaters. Uh, but the field trips, there are outings. And when there are field trips like you're talking about, like concerts, theater, movies, restaurants, the zoo, museums, if there are tickets to be bought, the cost of those tickets come out of pocket. But the transportation is provided, and
Hmm.
also there's staff there that are, going to assist. And they do those. Some of them do them more often than others, but they are a regular thing. They also celebrate holidays and, of course, birthdays. Many celebrate religious observances, Shabbats and church and the high holidays, and they do cater to that. And it depends on the community. And then, of course, on the activity calendar, there are some that are specific to those communities that I can't even recall because it's such a variety. But there is really something to be done all day long. And they also have transportation that is provided for errands and doctor's appointments.
And also, I would suspect that, if the family is nearby, there's nothing stopping them from the family coming by and taking them out
Oh,
into.
anything. It's
Right.
their
Of course.
home. It's
Yeah,
their
it's their home.
home.
It's like it's not a hostage taking.
No, and the only thing they ask, most of them do ask that if you're leaving, to let them know so that if you don't show up for a meal, they don't worry.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, question number three, and this is really, I'll say right to preface this, this was the question that kind of, it's the punchline for our, because it was, when Sue did her presentation there a few months back, this is what really jumped out at me in this whole conversation. That is, when will I know it is appropriate to move into a residential retirement community? And just, I'll even, I guess we should also probably put in there, I guess I can ask it now is, what do monthly costs include? But let's first of all,
sure.
before we get to the cost part, when is it that we'll know it's time?
That I'm going to break that into two parts.
No problem.
Okay. You're saying when will you know? We kind of touched on that. If you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling lonely,
Right.
it leads to depression. And if you find that you're only watching TV and that's all that's keeping you company, or maybe a book, which is good, maybe some puzzles, but you know your own isolation. You're not out with friends, you're not seeing people, you're only cooking for one person. And when you're only cooking for one person, most of the time, Wayne, they don't bother cooking.
Right,
They'll throw a frozen dinner in,
right,
maybe, eat a little here, eat a little there.
right.
That's when you know that one of the signs of mental deterioration is lack of socialization. It is a known fact. Doctors will tell you that socialization is key to keeping your brain active and mentally stimulated. So more isolation is the slippery slope. No doubt about it. That is a scientific observation, and they deal with that all the time. Now, you asked, when will you know? Most likely, it's the family who notices, and the family is the one who contacts us.
Interesting, because
And
I
when
was
I
going
s-
to ask you about who was most likely to be. It was actually one of my. I was going to ask you at some point about who was the most likely to make that phone call. You just answered my question for me.
as much as I say working with a senior is my favorite client
Right.
because I can do what they want, but it's usually the family. I'm going to say probably at least 90% is the family. And I respect that and I appreciate that because they're observant. Sometimes it's a family who lives somewhere else and they come to visit mom or dad,
And
and
they're
then they
noticing
see
things
there's a
aren't
real
right.
change. That's right. Um, or it could be that they see them all the time and there's been falling. Falls and are a big issue.
Oh yes,
And
I know that one.
and then of course mental acuity. And uh it's a family's concern. And something we didn't touch on yet is the sandwich generation. And that's huge, right? You've got the kids and you've got the parents. And it's really exhausting. And it takes its toll
Caregiver
on,
burnout is a thing, and I've
thank
heard it
you.
said.
Yep, yep.
I've
And
heard it
it,
more than once. So for years on end, I've heard
yep.
the comment about how oftentimes the person
Mhm.
that's most affected by caring for a loved one is the caregiver, more
We
so
say
than.
it all the time. We tell our family member, we say we are more worried about you than we are about them because you're taking care of them. They're going to be well cared for no matter where they are. But you, and if you get sick, then what? What about your kids? Even if your kids are grown, what about your kids? And then they have to worry about you. And what about your grandkids? You still want to have fun with them. And if you're dedicating all of your energy to your parent, that person who needs your help, what's left over for you at the end of the day? And you're working and you're this and you're doing that. There's nothing left. We only have so much reserve.
Mhm.
And it has to impose on sleep, which is essential. So that caregiver burnout is a really big deal. And looking at the alternative, it's like it's a gift. It's lifting that weight off the shoulders. You can visit as often as you want, you can go out as often as you want, but it's not 24/7 worry. And that worry is debilitating.
And it's applicable. I have a friend of mine who actually had their daughter had been paralyzed, and for about the first 6 years after the accident, they were not only having running their career, but they were also the caregiver. And finally, she had to, you know, surrender, I guess, for lack of a better word, right?
Hmm.
And I think for the betterment of both of them, because I think it was obviously impacting their relationship as well because of.
Absolutely. But in the
Right.
beginning, it's so hard. And in that case, even harder. And
Yeah.
there's got to be a feeling of guilt. There's got to be a feeling of like you failed, the failure and not being, but
Hmm.
in the end, it really does improve the situation in the relationship. Because
Yeah.
I think that when you're going back to the seniors, I think when you're dealing with anyone, child or senior, that the resentment grows. You can't help it. We're
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
And the burnout is tangible.
Yeah. Just before we wrap up here, we talked a little bit about, I'm going to circle back to it on the cost
I
issue.
I do, and I'm glad you said that because we also, circling back when we were talking about the retirement communities, I didn't touch upon the other part of residential care, and that's the small boarding care home.
Okay.
And it's really important because for cost purposes too. Because in a large place, you move in, you're paying your basic rent, which
Mhm.
includes your meals 3 times a day, housekeeping, transportation, all utilities except phone. Most of them are wired for internet now. And so you've got a lot that comes into and is included in that basic rent.
Mhm.
However, when you need care, if you don't have LTC, it's all added up. It's all added on, and it
Mhm.
can become pretty expensive depending on the level of care that you require.
Right.
Memory care units are more expensive than assisted living because it requires more and also the ratio of caregivers. The board and care homes, the small homes, which typically are licensed for 6 people, although some of them are duplexes and some of them are side by side, which allows for more socialization. It's kind of nice for mingling.
Mhm.
They don't have as much socialization. They don't have as many activities. They are more like living in a home. They are nurturing. They are attractive. They are sweet and cozy. Here's where they excel is in staffing and care. You might have 6 residents, but you'll have 2 or 3 staff, and there's someone awake at night. And you're in a large place too, they do rounds and they check. But in a small boarding care, there is somebody falls, it's heard. There is Johnny on the spot response. And the care is definitely more personalized and individual. And going to cost, they are less expensive because even on the top end, it's all inclusive. Whereas the large places, there's the additional piling
It's
on.
more a la carte.
Absolutely. And some places do it by points, some by dollars. It's confusing. But so the small places, when they assess a person, it's all included. The only thing that's extra, and also in the large places as well, is if they are incontinent, then that the care for the incontinence, the the supplies for the incontinence are extra. The care is included, but the supplies are added up. That's all. So
Well,
sometimes they're a more economic way to go, but not as social. So cost in a big place. Oh boy. Location, location, location. That's first of all. Um, and just like real estate, and it's costly and it's getting harder and harder. And it's shared room versus private room, location, it's level of care, what they're going to need. So it can be, I always start with it, please don't shoot the messenger. I don't make the prices.
right.
Uh, I don't know what area you want me to quote because it does make a difference. So let's say, let's say LA. Okay, let's say LA West Side. And then you can knock a couple $1,000s off for the valley, for the south end of the valley, which is closest to LA. Out where you are, it is pretty close to the south end of the valley. I mean, it's not inexpensive. It's of course nothing's inexpensive. In a large place, I'm going to say a single studio will, with no care, will start, a smaller studio will probably start in the mid fives,
That's what
5,500.
I thought you were going to say.
And then depending on size, it can go up to 7,500 around there. And then with care, I can't even quote because each community does it differently.
Hmm.
And but it can add up depending if there's a lot of care there, it could add up a couple more $1,000s. If there's just a minimal care, it could be a few hundred. The most costly activity of daily living is medication management because of the liability. So, which is understandable. Your activities of daily living are your assisted needs.
Yes.
Okay, you know all about, I know
Yes,
you know all
the
about this. I'm
ADLs,
talking to
right? They call them,
the
and the
ADLs.
acronym is ADLs. And
Right.
basically, the way you think of ADLs is think about when you wake up in the morning, and the first thing you do usually is get out of bed. They call that transferring, and then going to the washroom, bathing, getting dressed, feeding.
It can be toileting if that's an
Toileting,
issue,
yeah, I meant to
right?
bring
It can
that
be
in there.
escorting if they need, even on a walker, if they need some extra
Sure.
support. Yeah.
And
So
generally, as a rule of thumb, in the world of long-term care insurance, if you are unable to do two or more activities of daily
tip,
living, you're considered, or you have a cognitive disability, you're attended,
then
considered,
you're eligible.
you're eligible, right? That's typically the
What are
way it
you
works.
finding now? I know what mine is because mine's old. My policy's 20 years old. But what do you find now in terms of the upfront exemption period? Like where it's coming out of pocket before it
Elimination
can,
period, 90
yeah.
days typically is a rule of thumb. But here's one thing that's really interesting
90
is
days,
about
did you say 90?
90 days elimination period is
That's what I
pretty
thought.
common. Yeah. But here's an interesting thing that's happening is I'm finding, and now again, I'm not talking law of large numbers here, but I'm telling you what I find really more interesting is the number of women that get declined versus men.
Really?
Yes,
I
well, here's why. And bone density is one of the main reasons, believe it or not. But there are other reasons. But see what the difference between living benefits and life insurance is this. Men, women typically outlive men. So from a living benefits perspective, men are less of a risk because they're not going to live as long, right? And
hmm
women typically live longer.
hmm
And one of the challenges I have in conversations with clients is the sense of, well, I take really really good care of myself, and this is true, and this is why you're going to end up, unfortunately, by the time you get into your mid to late 80s, and even God bless your client, eventually there's a term called enfeeblement that comes along with longevity. So
hmm
eventually. So anyway, yeah, that's again, I don't know how, if you can rely on my comment there as being some kind of like in the insurance world, the law of large numbers is very predictable, but that's something I've seen is more often than not, my female clients are more likely to get turned down than my male clients.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I actually encourage the kids that call me that if they don't have it, you don't want to do to your children what you're facing with your parents, having to kick in, pay for it, whatever that your folks don't
Right.
have. So look into long-term care insurance for yourself. It is a gift.
Yeah, well,
And
the younger you can get it, the better.
yeah,
We've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we could go down the rabbit
I
hole of the
know.
financial planning. All I will say is this before we wrap up, wealth management, financial planning, this is one reason why you want to meet with your financial advisor and have them, and this is what I do for my clients, is prepare a capital forecast. I call it, there's a blue sky version where you basically walk into your grave at age 95, right? Nothing happens. You just fall asleep, die in your sleep. But then there's the other in that scenario where you end up needing care for 6 to 8 years, right? So, what we do, and we do capital forecasting for our clients, we'll do that crash test, we'll call it, of what would happen if you needed care. So and will you have the financial resources to cover, are you self-insured, in other words, right? And so we do that kind of work with our clients, and it's really, really important to give them an idea of what they're up against, later on.
Can
Uh,
I add, can I
yes.
add that at Concepts, we have a mantra, and it is person, place, perfect match. But in general, to people listening or watching, no matter where you live, in my industry, may I encourage you, we say it is better to know us and not need us than to need us and not know us.
Well said. Beautiful.
And
Uh,
that would go for you too, Wayne. I mean, in your industry as well. People need you. They need to plan ahead.
those
And
who
I
fail to
know
plan
because
to fail, right?
Mhm, exactly. And be prepared to age well. That's what it boils down to.
I would imagine, I can't believe it wouldn't, the conversation we've had today, which I've been so looking forward to, and it's
Finally,
exceeded
we did
exceeded
it.
my exceeded my expectations even. For those who've been listening in today and they'd like to contact you directly, what's the best way? How can they reach you? What's the best way to? And they get on the for those watching, you're seeing your contact information below you on the screen. But we have folks listening on our podcast. Maybe you could just share with them how would best contact you.
Well, our website, of course, is conceptsforliving.com. Okay, easy to remember. Email. The general email is info@conceptsforliving.com. If they want to directly reach me, Sue@conceptsforliving.com. And of course, all my team has their individual emails. So, but
Sure.
info or Sue. And then the 800 number reaches everywhere, and that is 800-414-4242.
Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm
Thank
really
you
glad to
so
have you as
much.
a guest. It was really good.
Thank
Susan
you.
Pomerantz is the owner and CEO of Woodland Hills, California-based Concept for Living. Susan, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Wishing everyone a wonderful day.
I look forward to bringing you the Three Questions podcast, and I hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel and podcast channels. And to receive notification of when our latest episodes have been posted, please click on the notifications bell. And lastly, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meet with Wayne. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.